So I work at a hotel in my hometown, and I took my husband's truck to work and he was taking it to the shop for service. He has a huge truck that I only drive when I absolutely have to. But when I pull into a parking lot, I do notice that the whole lot is covered in snow so no one can see the lines for the spots. So I'm going to start looking like a moron and go ahead a few times, hoping that I'll make more progress. Finally parking, I get out of the truck and grab my backpack when I hear someone yell from the sidewalk behind the parking lot, "Hey, you gotta learn how to park." I'm embarrassed, I admit, but I close and lock the truck and start driving to the front of the building. Now the hotel has a staff gate, but it takes a code and my memory is bad, so I just go to the front and go through the main entrance. I hear the guy yelling again, "Did you hear me?" I walk faster and look behind me and this guy is following me. I keep walking but call back, "Please leave me alone, I have to go to work." The guy takes my hand and spins me around before I walk around the corner of the building and into the hallway. I will never forget what this guy was like for the rest of my life. He was dressed in black with a winter coat. His eyes were bloodshot as hell, and he smelled like a combination of cigarettes and whiskey. I thought he must be drunk, but he didn't slur at all when he spoke. He told me, "You are coming with me." The guy started pulling me back into the truck and I tried to pull my hand away from him and I told him to let go. He said, "Give me the keys, we are driving." I started to scream for help, and his grip on my hand got tighter. I'm a 26-year-old female, not skinny at all, but definitely much smaller than this guy. He was pulling me lightly, and the snow on the ground made my feet quickly bounce off the ground. I screamed, "Someone help, please!" But there was no one with us. I continued to struggle to get away from this guy. I prayed that there would be guests who could hear me, but it was our slow season, so no one was in the rooms on that side of the building. The guy turns to me and tells me to shut the hell up and give me the keys. Now I was carrying my backpack over one shoulder because it was too big and bulky for my uniform and shoes. I quickly slipped the belt from my hand and grabbed it. I shoved it in his face. The guy let me go, and I ran for my life to the front doors. I heard the boy yelling, but I ignored him. I was too afraid to look back at him, and eventually I ran to the employees' locker room. When I finally calmed down, I went to the front desk to talk to security. Unfortunately, there were no cameras on the other side of the building, so nothing was recorded. They called the police, and I filed a report. The police informed the hotel's general manager that security cameras on that side of the building should be seriously considered because drug addicts and addicts were known to be in the area. There were bars on several streets, apparently, and that was normal. They took the boy's description and said they would look into it. The manager apologized like he was crazy about the incident, but I told him it wasn't his fault. He's a really nice guy, and I asked the security guard to follow me so I could check out the truck and whatnot. Thankfully, it was fine. The guard promised to make more rounds outside, especially in the morning. I told my husband what had happened, and he drove me to work the next day and was happy to hear that the guards would be back outside at that time in the morning. They're still available, which is great. I force myself to do it again, but I don't get out of my car until I see my guard and he checks that I'm inside. I think she hopes to catch the guy if she comes back. The guy who covers it on weekends does the same. I'm also getting pepper spray, maybe a knife after work today. Unfortunately, I haven't heard from the police. Maybe I won't. The guy was afraid to go back to the area. Maybe he tried to go back and the guards let him go, but either way, I'll never see this guy again, or at least he might end up in jail. I work at San Diego CA International Airport. I fuel the plane, I work overtime and overtime, so I work. Here's why it's important. I work the night shift and I live 120 miles away, so when I'm not working, I'm usually on the road. I ride a lot, and I'm pretty familiar with my route now. There's this special place where, if I need to take a leak, I can get off the freeway and stay out of sight of other traffic. This place is about an hour in my mountains. Nothing in national miles, but my highway patrol or border patrol station is somewhere in the mountains because the border is a few miles south. So I got out of my car, turned off the engine, turned off the lights, and went to work. When I was done, I thought I heard footsteps nearby, but it was so dark and foggy that I could only make out figure. On the freeway from time to time, it's very quiet, so I sit in my car, start the engine, and deliberately shift the steering wheel in the direction of the figure to illuminate the lights. When I got there, What looked like a young girl with dark, loose, long dark hair was pushing a stroller with very short and slow steps. It's hard and comes down a small dirt road that I'm sure only Border Patrol cars use because it leads up into the mountains, but from where I am, I turn down a long little road into the mountains, behind the stone. I'm about 10 feet away, so I roll down the window with the intention of asking if she's okay. 1 in the morning, super cold. I'm slowly making progress at this point, and I'm pretty close, though I try to see inside the stroller and see 2 small hands moving like a child playing with their hands in the air. But here, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up because I hear a squealing, pig-like sound coming from the strollers. And now when I look at him, there is no free face, only eyes, nose, mouth, and I remember screaming out loud, "No!" I swerved the other way and headed for the freeway. It all happened in 20 or 30 seconds, and I know I won't stop here again. So I, a woman, was 15 years old at the time, in 2nd grade and 10th grade in high school. I grew up in a small farming town, then population 1,400, in Washington State, USA. I met Ricky, a man in shop class where we flirted every day. I was the only girl in the class, and that's why I thought he was flirting with me. I also thought he was 16 since he was in my class, but had a license when he was 19. I was popular at school because I was friends with everyone, but Ricky was too popular to be cute and cool. So he noticed me and even started flirting with me. Even like I said, I realized it because I was the only girl in the class. I admit I let it go in a big way. I thought nothing would happen to him because he was really handsome and popular, and there were pretty girls in the hallways and other classes. So the flirting started with us having sex, which I thought would never happen, even though I had no intention of it. The shop class was a normal high school classroom where we attended and did tests, and then the shop itself was about 100 yards from the main building, I would say. The high school parking lot was on the opposite side of the high school building from the shop class. Our school also had an open campus, which meant students could leave the campus during lunch if the office was busy. So in the late spring of that year, 1997, Ricky and I were flirting one day, and he actually proposed to us. After that class, he offered to leave at lunchtime and go to her house. I don't know why I agreed, except to realize that I've been talking and talking for weeks and not admitting that I lied all the time. So after class, he and I left the store and we walked to the parking lot behind the school. We got into his nice truck and left the school. I used to go out because 1, my friends expected me to leave campus with them, my locker, and 2, was I really going to have sex with one of the hottest guys in school for the first time? We drove through town to his house about half a mile from campus. We went inside, and when the door closed, he started kissing me. To this day, that first kiss is the best I've ever had. I didn't fully appreciate it at the time because I was still free. We made our way to his bed and continued to kiss for 45 minutes before he made me move forward with him. He went down to his drawers, but I had everything, shoes and a jacket. He wasn't pushy or anything, but he tried to go along with what we'd been talking about for weeks. 45 minutes later, I said I wanted to go back to school. He sighed heavily, put his clothes back on, and then we left. We walked to school in silence, and when we got to the parking lot, he asked if I was okay. I said yes, and went out and quickly went inside. From my peripheral vision, I saw his truck pull out of the parking lot. Lunch was still going on, so I went to my locker, grabbed my books for the next class, and went to study before class started. Before class started, 2 of my friends were supposed to meet for lunch, and they asked if I was okay. I was fine. I didn't want to talk about it. Then one of the girls left to go to her class, and the other girl, Allie, was in my class, so she stayed. Halfway through the class, I decided to tell Allie about what had happened, and made her promise not to tell anyone. He was worried, and I realized that I was in a dangerous situation, and no one knew where I was, or even who I was with. To be honest, I didn't think about it until he showed up. The next few days, Ricky went to school but skipped shop class. I was fine with that too, because I didn't want to see him, mostly because I was embarrassed. But Ricky started coming to class again and tried to talk to me, but I was rude. For about a week, actually, shop class tried to talk to me about her. I ignored her. She cried and walked away. I was much more civil after that, but I never went back to flirting. He started approaching me between classes, and even at lunch, just being friendly and light flirting. But I never returned the flirting. Random groups of girls came up to me and asked me what was going on between Ricky and me, why he liked me and why he ignored them. I really had no answers. During the second to last week of school, Ricky hung out with me a lot, but was really quiet. He then told me that I was the first girl to be rejected. By the last week of school, he was back to hanging out with his friends and flirting with pretty girls. And I was relieved, mostly because I felt guilty for leading him this way, and guilty for putting myself in that situation. I actually ran into Ellie in the middle of summer vacation, and she asked if I had heard of Ricky. And I told him no, and he said Ricky was running from the police for trying to kill 2 people. He said he heard it was a father with drug addiction. I was stunned and let my thoughts run wild. I mean, if he was willing to kill 2 people, what would stop me from raping or even killing him? A year later, one of the men died from complications from his wounds, so the charges were actually reduced to manslaughter and manslaughter. I later learned that this was not a drug deal, but actually a failed cartel. I have more information on this, and I'm not sure why Ricky would have hurt me or his father if he wasn't his employer. But this story is too long, so I'll end it here. I don't know what happened to Ricky, and I heard he fled to California and then Mexico. But one thing I do know is that he was never caught by the police. I believe there are many things in this world that are incomprehensible. You know, the things that we have a hard time discussing with others because you don't want to be called crazy. But you know, they're all the same. I think my dad has something like that in his house. There really isn't one big story to tell, but rather a bunch of little ones that come together and add up to something really difficult. Most of these are told from my father's point of view, and I was able to experience none of them for myself. I once spent the night at my father's house, and we were all in the living room watching TV. My little sister was on the couch with my dad and stepmom, and I was sitting on the couch with one of my dogs. The other dog was lying in front of the couch. Between the couch and the recliner was an end table, and on the table was a glass box that my stepmother had inherited from her mother. When we suddenly heard the accident, we did not expect it. We didn't expect it, so we all jumped and the glass box on the table fell off the back of the table. Now, the glass box was too far off the edge, so it couldn't fall off on its own. No one was close enough to knock on the table, and it honestly looked like someone had lightly pushed the box over the edge, like a cat would do or something. Well, we've only spent a few minutes investigating just one of these events. My father was watching TV in the middle of the room. It was the middle of the day and he was the only one home. Suddenly, from my and my stepmother's bedroom, she heard a loud and deep thud, and her first thought was that someone had broken into the house. So he ran out there, ready to beat the daylights out. He looked around for a while to find an empty room and found no one there, and it was strange. Once again, my father was in the room again. It was just him and the dogs, and he got up to hold the remote, and he commented, "Do you know what type you create when you think out loud?" Well, he heard someone's voice, silence in his ears. And how do you close when my father, the king of evil, takes the distance and returns to the chair? He did not hear the rest of the day. One night my father and stepmother had just gotten into bed. I think they just pulled the covers off and the door to the bathroom shook. I'm not talking about the gentle shakes that can come with an older home. I think it looks like someone grabbed the door and tried to pull it off its hinges. Needless to say, my stepmother was glad that my father didn't work nights. Along with these things, there are shadow figures made by both my father and my sister. One day, in the middle of the day, my father watched one of his football shows in the kitchen. Something made him look at the kitchen door, and he says he saw shadowy cloven feet walking down the hall. My dad, once again the king of mischief, looked into the kitchen, and when he saw nothing, shrugged his shoulders and went back to his football. It was a sight that both my father and my sister swore they saw. In the back right corner of the living room, there is a very short hallway, 3 doors and a bathroom. The door to my room and the door to what used to be my sister's room, but is now used for storage. The double bedroom doors are on the right, in front of the bathroom door. You can actually see the bedrooms, and they said a shadowy figure came out of the bathroom and into the storage room. By the way, the storage room seems to be located when this thing is not bothering my family. My sister refuses to even go near that room, and even walking past it makes your hair stand on end. I could go on for hours about the little things that happened, but I'll stop here for now. If any of you have any ideas on what we should do, I'd love to know. This was years ago, but it still haunts me to this day. When I was in high school, I lived near a small neighborhood. All I had to do was jump the fence, and I'd be in the neighborhood where all my friends lived. We were all between 12 and 13 years old, and there were 5 of us. One of the houses we always stayed in had a yard on the edge of the woods, and we built trails around it, complete with bridges over the river, into a water tank where all the rainwater went, and also into the water. Drains from the sewers. I say sewer, but it only flows through the streets, and we use the tunnels under the road during the power play. Anyway, we called this place the Wall. The wall is backed up directly to the neighboring house and the next street, and we could clearly see the houses through the trees in the direction we wanted, so it's not like we're really that far off. Apart from the path we were looking for, there was a main exit along the fence that led directly into the heart of the neighborhood. Now, the wall was over the next street. There were 3 houses on our side where the wall sat. In one of these houses lived a famous police officer whose children we were friends with. Across the way was a large farm to the left and a heavily wooded area to the right, complete with its own vacant haunted house, barely visible from the road except in winter. No one lived there at that time, not even for a few years. So, as I said, and I'm trying to paint a picture here, you will understand that we were very close to other houses, which makes the story strange. One day, my friend and I, just 2 girls, decided to go to the wall. Taking familiar paths through the forest, we made our way to the wall. A few weeks ago, our group tried to build a bridge to continue our work. Picking up branches and heavy stones, we saw something coming from the woods across the street. It was a man, and this man was dressed to the hilt in camouflage. Typical hunting gear I've seen before, though the strangest thing is that he has a gun in his hand and is in a residential area. Luckily, we saw him before he did, and we're glad we did, because when he saw us, his eyes locked on both of us, and his speed started to pick up, and he made a beeline for us. He never said a word or even lowered his weapon. He was in his hands at any moment, but we get out of there and take the exit to the neighbor's heart and run to my friend's house to tell someone, but we tell his father right away, and he goes to check on him, to find someone without a trace. I don't know where or how quickly the man disappeared from sight, but his father wasted no time and was there within seconds. The wooded area this man came from wasn't big enough, at least not big enough to think about hunting, and he definitely wasn't hunting land or anything. It is very basic housing, with the primary school less than a 5-minute walk away. No lie, the school was there. So I never understood why this person was here in the first place, especially since we lived next door to where we worked. My grandfather has a cabin near Lincoln, Montana, that I visited many times as a child and teenager. There was always a very strange and uncomfortable feeling for him. There is a large rock about 12 feet high that I would climb. One day I was standing over it when I felt someone shake me from behind. I fell to the ground and had the wind knocked out of me. Mom watched the whole thing and asked me why I jumped, because there was no one behind me. A few years later, I was staying at a cabin with friends, and we both decided to go to bed early. That's all I really remember, but so were the other 2 by the fire. Apparently, we both woke up in the cabin an hour later and started yelling to get us out. Apparently, I banged on the door and screamed for it to open. They also started to leave because there was no lock on the door and they didn't understand what the hell was going on. When they finally opened the door, they found us both asleep. Once again, when we got there was a dead deer carcass in the fire pit. But that might not even be normal. I mean, other small dead animals seem to be common there. It really is. We haven't been there in years because I live in another part of the country now. I don't know if this is a particularly interesting story, but I thought I'd share my experiences because they're weird. And I don't know, I wonder if you guys have any idea what's going on there. So I'm a mail carrier and I know, super cool. Honestly, you'd be surprised at the amount of weird stuff that happens to us. When I delivered, people followed me and tried to get into the delivery truck to steal things. When a customer vomited in my car when she opened the package, her husband had to take it to the housekeeper. I brought the dildos out of their slim packs. Dragon dildos are no less. I saw people having sex right next to my separate boxes, and they didn't stop for me. And this is what usually happens with contract carriers. For those of you who don't know, contract carriers are mail carriers who contract for mail routes, usually in rural areas that I understand fancy jeeps can't pass. So we use our own vehicles to deliver the mail, and we are paid monthly depending on the type of route and how long the route takes each day. The post office deems fair. We're technically self-employed, but we have to follow the rules of the post office, and we even have to be certified to touch the mail. But of course, when we are in the areas where we are most of the time, weird things like the ones I mentioned above always happen. These events happened when I was subbing, the person who was the contract owner but did not own the route in any way. I was basically paid out of pocket by the owner of the route. But now, I'm the somewhat disgruntled owner of a first-time 10-year routing contract. I've been on contract for about 7 months now, so I think it's pretty easy. The route itself takes about 2.5 hours, sorting email to send, another 3 to 4 hours to send on a good day, 5 to 6 hours on a super busy day. I can't wait to see how the holidays go on this route. But anyway, until I got the contract, I didn't know what I was offering. The way someone gets a contract is they bid for it. The buyer will provide a monthly salary amount that they feel will be a fair deal for this route. The post office and the applicant then decide which amount is most accurate, in their reasonable opinion for the route, and they give it to the person who has that amount. I was lucky enough to get it, so I get a very good salary that I technically chose for myself. I knew about the route, but it went down the valley. I live in a very small desert town with many sprawling mini communities. These outlying areas provide the majority of our office's contract routes. My route goes to very small ranching properties within 25 miles of the city, and random isolated properties scattered in the most remote areas. There are so many mountains and dirt roads I've been on that it's easy to get lost if you don't know where you're going. There's one area in particular that nestles through a small forest between the hills leading up to the state highway. It's not like an evergreen forest or anything. That's the closest definition I can give. They are not really trees, but more like large bushes, nestling very closely on either side of the road. Although this is near the end of the route, it takes a good portion of my clients' addresses, so when I was in training, the former owner of the routes, I'll call him Jim, gave me some of the residents of the routes. Of course, there are many farm owners, and they are the recipients of the largest number of parcels. It's not really surprising to me because they are the richest people out there, and we call this section the ranches. There are elderly retirees who live in a small retirement community on the outskirts of town. It is very small, spread out, like a small town. In second place are parcels, random shopping, and sometimes gifts and whatnot from relatives. And we call that area a retirement home. These are the clients I talk to the most. They called him Jim. These people live so far from the network that most of the time we don't send packages to them. As a general rule, we are not allowed to deliver boxes to homes if they are within 3 miles of a P.O. box. Most of them live within 5 or 6 miles of the boxes. Their boxes are in long rows, or clusters as we call them, on the roadside. As a courtesy to these customers, I ask them to provide their phone numbers so I can call them if they have a package and they can meet me at the box. Most of them don't mind, and I'm thankful they do, because most of these roads are treacherous. I once tried to be nice and deliver a box to one of them and lost my service, so I couldn't drive for almost 4 hours. Eventually they found me and finally gave me their number, and even though it was on that part of the tour, they didn't get many boxes. But then Jim called it Ghost Town. It's not really a town, but a lot of single houses like the old neighborhood. But these guys are closer to the road, and they're the forest dwellers I mentioned above. He also called it a dirty town because these people are never at home because most of them are snowbirds, or those who are really scary. And there are a few houses there, usually empty, with lots of snowflakes that go on a lot. There are 3 houses involved in the stories I want to tell you. 2 of them are located in the bustling city, and the other is outside. But the last one is the worst, so I'll leave it until last. It's obvious, but it's the most interesting as far as history and events go. I tell them in order of intensity, Stay with me. I will also name each house here because I work a lot at work. How do I remember their addresses without thinking about it? Real names have apparently been changed for customer privacy. So, the Bailey Cluster is a group of houses in a ghost town owned by a family named Bailey. The mailboxes are all nestling on the side of the road against the big bushes in the woods I mentioned. There are 4 in total before the mailboxes, a small dirt road leading to their property. I'd say it should be 4 feet all the way. Anyway, because when you drive, the bushes on both sides scrape the side of my car. I got a few lines because of them. I asked them to cut it, but they never do. Finally, I gave up. When you arrive at the property, you are greeted by this large, 6-foot-tall wrought iron gate with the name Bailey made of bent horses and welded pipes on top. As usual, if the gate is closed, we never encourage you to try it. If the client doesn't tell us it's okay, we don't really have to close. For Bailey, I get out, walk the parcel through the gate, and up to the first house not far from the gate. Now I must say that I have never met these people. I've talked to them on the phone and I've been on their property, but I've never seen any of their hides or hair. There are a total of 10 people at the address, and their mail is distributed because their homes resemble a trailer park. For example, one of them gets the post office at 1 Ghost Town Road, another one gets it at State 8, another one gets it at Mobile 2 or 3 or 4. There are 4 people at 1 and 2, and 1 person at 3 and the rest at 4. Every time I deliver a package to them, I always leave it at the first house. After passing through their gate, there is a small hill to climb. You can see the common green roof of the first house looking out over the hill, and as you get closer, it quickly becomes clear why this place is so awkward. Clowns. These are the people. They love clowns. There are clown statues, paintings, mobiles, windmills, you name it. It's just a clown face. They even have clown dolls, and none of them look cute. They are all threadbare, worn out from sitting in the hot desert sun, and I'm sure animals have made homes in some of them. In fact, there are some large enough to house a family of small squirrels. Now I know it's not normal, or even all that creepy, but you have to admit, there's a little more to it than that, right? The first house is a simple 1-wide mobile home with a green tea-painted roof, and all the windows have clown decals. The little clown faces honestly look like they're from a coloring book, hand-colored and all. At one end of the site is a porch. It's not very big, about 6 or 7 feet. There is a small hole with dozens of clown wins and guards hanging from it, almost forming a curtain of them together. There's a rocking chair on the porch, and this thing is painted like a clown. The curved rockers are painted red. The legs that attach them to the seat are yellow with red polka dots. The seat and arms are white, and the back is white with 3 large red dots painted like a puffball on a clown's shirt. There's a clown face on the top of the back, and you put it all together, and I'm telling you, it's a nightmare. The reason I mention this chair as well is because I left the parcels, and I always do, but I never forget that I left them there. There were 4 boxes for them, 1 for 1 and the others for 3, and I called ahead because I was nearing the end of the route, and I would be there for about 3 hours. In other words, longer to them. I'm always told the same thing. I wonder who is their matriarch or something, to leave them all in that chair. I didn't match their property at this time, and would have delivered in about a month, but they only had mail and small parcels that fit in the box. So the first time I went there, seeing their little cluster of clowns was a little nerve-wracking. I'm scared of clowns and have been since I was little, but why is a story for another time? But I entered the first house and looked around. It was so detached and weird that it felt like every clown around me was watching me. I placed the boxes in a neat little pile on the chair and placed the chair so the boxes wouldn't fall. When he was still there, I turned and tried to hurry away, but he stopped me. I froze and knew exactly what it was. I turned around and, of course, this chair was rocking. Not just a little, but enough to knock one of the boxes into the doorway. It honestly looked like someone had purposely taken it back and made him throw it as hard as he could. You can bet your bottom dollar I didn't hesitate a bit. I ran, nailed the hell out of there, and didn't stay after that. Another time when I had a parcel for them, I almost wrote it off in protest, but called and told them to leave it in the chair again. And at this point, I felt like no one was there. I mean, I've been there a dozen times, and I remember standing at the gate at the top of the hill. Where is everybody? According to their letters, there must be at least a few children living there, and when I was there that day, it was the middle. Age, and why weren't the children at home? Playing outside or something? Why have I never seen it there? The second and third houses are slightly away from the first house. It's a 5-minute walk to them, but you can see them very well. The curtains are always open, but I don't see anyone inside. The fourth house is the farthest at the top of a small hill. They have a large picture window in front of the door. Her curtains are always open too, but again I don't see anyone there. But the strangest thing, of course, is that their cars are always there, but they never move. There are 2 trucks and a car, all relatively new. The oldest one, I think, was a 2012 model and an old station wagon, and the wagon seems to have been lowered quite a bit, but the others seem to be well taken care of, always at least clean. Anyway, this time I was at the parcels another time and saw that no one was there, so I got curious and called the woman I worked with when I delivered the parcels. I would just tell him that I hope someone comes back soon to collect the parcel because there is a lot of theft out there. It's also not a lie, as there are usually more remote routes. You will probably be surprised that it is much more widespread than the city. I heard the phone ring in the first house next to me. If I'm on the porch, I can look out the window behind the evil chair, and it's close. My phone rang, and I wanted to see if someone picked it up, so I squeezed myself between the seats. I had never looked inside before. More clowns, of course, and clown-themed throw pillows and sofas. And on the side table, with a clear view from the window, I saw a cell phone with a man and a lady on the caller ID. No one answered, but when I left, he called me back and I was gone for 5 minutes, I would say, when he was done. I told him he was coming to make sure someone was home, and he said someone is always here. According to Jim, he had never seen one there. The third and final most interesting event that happened in the Bailey cluster was just last month. I got a big box for them. I really needed $1, and I called before I left the post office, and the lady I always talked to told me her oldest son would help. I thought to myself, I will finally meet one of them. It must be good, right? Well, I get there, and that's my last package, and then I'm free to wind through the last 50 or so boxes I have after them. I have a total of 670 boxes on my route, and I go back, get the dolly out, put the box on top, and start pulling it up to the door. I look around, and there is no one to meet me, of course. The lady told me, but she is waiting for me at the entrance of the first house, and when she sees me, she comes down to help. You can see the gate very well from the driveway, but I can never see my car from there. So I respected him even if he couldn't see me, but no one came down. I waited about 5 minutes, screw it, I'll get it. And boy, did I struggle with it up that hill. I don't know what was in that box, but I'm sure it weighed at least 75 pounds. The post office has a weight limit of 70 kilograms. Many companies try to stretch it to around 75, 80. Usually they go to OPS, but sometimes they slip through the cracks and come to us. But anyway, I arrive at the first house, and of course no one is there. I look around, and as usual, I'm alone with a bunch of clown dolls. I slide the box over the stairs on the dolly, and I lean it against the rail next to the chair. It's too big to sit on, so I get in my car, and when I hear that, "Thank you," from behind, it was a man's voice, and I thought it was he who should help her. I quickly run up the hill, and no one is there. That box is gone from the porch. It was in about 10 seconds, and I didn't even go down the hill. It didn't take long to get back, but I looked out the window and everything, and I didn't see a soul. I really hate going to Bailey's cluster, and I go there a lot these days. So the second house, this is the place where I go the most. Jim told me about this place while I was training. This is another snowflake where people live only from October to March. They were there when I started, and they came back earlier this month. Super nice people too, and I love them, but I don't know why they live there. When Jim started working at the post office in the early 90s, a guy who used to route for him told him this story. According to him, there lived a family of 5, all of whom were completely insane. The mother is schizophrenic and apparently hurts the children because of her voices. His father was no better. He was a senseless drunk who sat while his crazy wife listened to the children. And one night, the oldest boy, 18 years old, finally got fed up with how he was being raised and tried to run away with his siblings. But the mother, of course, tried to stop them, and the child finally knocked, and he killed his parents and painted his walls with their blood. This event changed him, and his siblings ran away, and he apparently stayed at home with his parents' corpses, where he cut his own throat and painted the floor with his own blood before succumbing to the loss of blood and killing himself. They were not found for several months. The place was eventually cleared, torn down and rebuilt, and the young man who built the new house was forced to paint the house red. It's not red or anything, but it's very red, if that makes any sense. There is no long way to this place. It sits on the road at the end of a haunted town. The end is literally a dead end, and they are at the tail end of it, where signs tell you to turn. The current owners, we'll call them Mr. Nice because they're so nice and I'm not creative at all at the moment, have told me so many horror stories about living there. And with you guys, to be honest, I sometimes think they get some sick vibes from them. Even if they're not there, I'm going to push them all the way. But I have to go past their house to get to the turnaround, and the neighbors always have mail, so I walk a lot with them. And let me tell you, I saw some really weird shit there, but every time I pass the House of Blood, I get this horrible feeling of dread. What I mean by this is that when I was sending packages to them, I would get out of the car and the car would stand on the side of the road like I was standing at the bottom of a cliff, honestly. Stepping onto their property is like jumping to my death or something. It's terrible, and I don't know how they last. I mean, they live there 6 months out of the year, so I guess it might not be too bad for them. But if I only deliver packages once, I don't know. Means a lot to me. But anyway, ma'am, a good one told me one day to always look at the third window from the left, for apparently the son of a madman likes to sit. She calls him Tommy, even though that's not his real name. He feels like he belongs to him, and he talks about him like he's his son or something. I think he feels sorry for her, and believes her soul is trapped because of all the horrible things that happened to her. When he first told me, my reaction was simply, no. But one day temptation got the better of me, and I looked. When you walk into the mailbox, you can see all their windows, and their house is a 6-story long, 1-story place with 3 small doors on each side. Of course, the house is red, as I said, but the trim and the door are white, and the window is the window that sits next to the door on the left. Mrs. Nice told me it was the front living room, and I looked. I couldn't believe my eyes because I didn't see a full bodysuit or anything like that, but I definitely saw a face. And he looked so tired. You know the happy and sad mask you see for drama in the theater? It's like a sad mask, only painful. But I closed my eyes, and the face suddenly disappeared, and the open curtain was now closed. Once again, I went up to the house to put a package by the door. The good guys went home that day, and the truck was gone, so I decided to put the package back and leave a note in the box to let them know, since I didn't have a number for them at the time. As I walked back, I placed the package over a small fence in their yard. Once I turned around and felt myself running into someone, but there was nothing in front of me but air. But I swear there's something in front of me. I didn't want to go forward. It was like an invisible wall in front of me. I couldn't see it. I knew that if I went any further, I might hurt. It felt really oppressive and strange. And I went back to the house and walked along the wall to the front, and there was some invisible force. It felt like it was following me, and I'm ashamed to admit it. But I started to cry because I felt like someone was pressing against me as I moved, as if trying to push me back. When I hit the edge of the house, I just got a cloud and ran to my car and sped away. I cried most of the way back because it was so, I don't know what else to say, but scary. The next time he told Mrs. Nice about it, she said that Tommy liked to do it. He tries to scare people, and he always shows this to Mr. Nice. About 3 weeks after they left for their summer house, I passed the house and I swear I saw someone standing by the mailbox. But if that's the right word, it wasn't solid. It looked like a blurred outline of a person as I approached, and as I passed, my head seemed to spin with me. I hate to leave that house, and I'm glad they're back for the winter because it makes me feel a little better knowing they're there. But I don't like the idea of bringing them packages at all. I don't want to be around Tommy. But now for the latter, I certainly saved the latter for worse. So, I am the third house called Having Eyes of the Mountains. I hate this house. It wasn't in the ghost town. It's in the previous chapter aside. These houses are so spread out that we don't usually release parcels for them because they are so far away. But this house is an exception because it's a mile away from a cluster of mailboxes, and these people are never at home as far as I can tell. Jim told me never to call them because they were so rude and so hostile. He told me to go to their gate if I have a package, always bring it in the mail or they will call and complain. Leave the parcel in a basket hanging on the fence, on a rubber band with the postman, then just turn around and leave. He told me never to stay there long and said that if I told them they would certainly be hostile. So I do as I'm told, but thankfully I'm hardly home when I'm there. I'm going to tell you right now, there's something there, and I know it sounds cheesy, but it's true. I don't know the history of this place. These people are apparently the biggest pricks in the world. 2 people live there or something, relatives from what Jim told me. They run a small chicken farm and bring their eggs to the grocery store in town to sell at that time. It is not uncommon to see their chickens walking on the road leading home. Honestly, a road is just a road. It's like a pretty small hiking trail, but it's the only way to get there. And I know I've said this before, but man, I hate going there. I call it the Eye House of the Hills because it is located between 2 big hills, and from a distance the mountains look like an eye, and the house honestly looks like a mouth. That and the look of the place, it looks like the hills have eyes right out of a movie. Everywhere there are slaughtering equipment, bloody knives, cleavers, chains, and hooks, including the cows, but I think they keep the meat themselves. The smell is also cruel. It is always like death. It wouldn't shock me at all if these guys were out there killing and slaughtering cows to justify the smell of death. And every time I go out there, there's always something going on. I've been out 6 times to deliver parcels, so I'll tell you about each incident. The first time I started dating was about 3 months later. I did as I was told and wrapped the mail in a rubber band and headed home. It takes me 3 or 4 minutes to get there. It's around the bend, and you see the other 2 hills sitting between the houses. The main house is fenced with a gate, but the entire property has an external fence that you cannot enter. But when you're up against the door, the whole place looks smaller because it's full of trash. It's full of butchery and random metal sculptures and worn furniture, trash, a few skulls here and there, and then the house itself. The house is a small trailer cemented to the ground, so it is not mobile. A ramp or ramp sits at the bottom of the door and leads to the gate, and the basket for packages is here. This gated community has fences and other enclosures for the animals, and it's smelly, weird, and only roams here. So I drop the box and mail in the basket and turn to leave. After seeing this place for the first time, I didn't want to leave at all. When I got to my car, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I swear I saw someone standing behind my car. But I shook my head asking him to move, and there was no one there. Of course, I didn't stay a second longer after that. The second event was closer to the evening. It was another super hard day, and I didn't want to go there. But as I approached, I saw a man standing at the window of the house. I thought it was one of those trying to see who was coming. I have car magnets on my car that all say USPS so people know who I am. I thought it would be easier for him to see them and know the package was coming, not some random weirdo. But as I approached, the figure in the window seemed to disintegrate and eventually disappear altogether. I saw this and didn't want to get out of the car. I wanted to stay there and throw the parcel and mail out the window. After working up the courage, I hurried from the car to the basket and back and went to leave. As I was getting into the car, I heard this really loud laugh, and it was right next to my car. It's like someone is standing next to me, huh? After that, I prayed not to go back for a while, but had to return 2 months later with 4 large boxes for them. It was a very easy day this time, and I got wind quickly, so I was happy about that. They were in the middle of the route, so they were like halfway to me, and I walked into the house and was greeted by a big bull in the yard. I don't usually worry about animals, but a bull is not someone you want to mess with, is it? He was standing a few meters from the fence with the basket, so I waited for him to be patient. I didn't want my honk to say that the angry priests who lived there wouldn't come home and yell at me or something. I didn't want to shoot it because I honestly didn't think it would work. All of a sudden, this bull moves and lets out the hell out of nowhere, as if someone is riding it. He approached the danger with my car before fleeing towards the fence. And then the whole choir erupted from that area, and it was just a cacophony of sound. I grabbed the boxes and ran into the fence as fast as I could. I didn't know what found the bull. I didn't care. I wanted to leave. I didn't see anything this time, but I was afraid the bull would come back and destroy my car or even scare me. Now, the fourth incident, not the worst, but still annoying. So I never had a small package that would fit in the box for them. To be honest, I almost slammed it into the mailbox with a screwdriver. I should have, but I didn't want them to call and complain. They haven't complained to me yet, so I wanted to keep it that way. So I reluctantly headed back to their house with the package and the mail, and when I got there, there was only one dead chicken hanging from the hole above the porch. It was strange, but given the track record of this place, it wasn't surprising. It's not as surprising as the giant cow hanging on a pole across the yard. I didn't notice the package until I put it in the basket. A tree covered the place as I walked, and as I was walking back to the car, both the chicken and the cow suddenly started squawking. It's not windy now, but one of these is a cow, though. I didn't think a light breeze would push the cow, but they were backing away almost in tandem, and at this point I said no and left because I didn't want to stay. The rest of the show. The fifth time was 2 weeks ago, and it was quiet for a while I was there, and I hoped in vain that I wouldn't have to go back much longer, but I will. The holidays start and everyone gets their stuff, so it makes sense. So I go out there with 3 boxes and see a person at the window who is breathing for the first time. Jim told me one brother was in a wheelchair. It's a brother, you see. He was bald, with my weird tribal tattoo that I believe was his hairline, just sitting at the window and looking at me. I waved out of politeness and he didn't return it. It was the first time we laid eyes on each other, but I don't know what I expected him to do. Maybe a smile back and a wave or something, but I know these guys are pretty cool. When I put the package in the basket, I noticed something behind me without looking at it. And I looked over and saw someone walking behind one of the chicken coops. I looked back at my brother at the window, and he gave me a kind of scowl. You saw it right. You looked at the scroll. I nodded slowly and walked back to the car. He looked back at me, and when I turned back to the road, I saw him go out the window and close the curtain. Last time was yesterday, and now is the loosest thing next to the bull. So I had a typical holiday season Monday, a busy day, lots of mail, parcels and whatnot. And of course they had to deliver 5 parcels, so I get out there around 4 in the afternoon and I'm already exhausted, I'm half done, and I know I won't be home until 7 in the evening. It takes a good 45 minutes to get back to the post office and another 10 minutes to free up my day. I know I won't finish the route until about 6, so I try to rush everything. It's not a good time to get out of this place either, so I get out and put some boxes in the basket and the rest under. And I'm off. Suddenly, I feel a hard touch on my shirt that pulls me back and I fall dirty on my ass. I bang my head against the side of the trailer and swear to myself before standing up. I thought maybe I caught my shirt on something. But as I walked away, I jerked again and came back again. And this time I know I didn't hit anything because I was about 2 feet from the fence on my left and there was nothing on my right. And I hit this, try to run and pull hard, and I feel another shake and hear that god-awful laugh again. When I got rid of what was holding me, I didn't look back and ran for my car. I still talk to Jim about these things, and when I tell him about these things, he goes, yes, that place is more oppressed than any other I can think of. But in Jim's opinion, the whole route is bad. Like I said, there are other things out there that have weird stuff, but those are the ones I've found to be the strongest. After yesterday's little incident with Hill's eyes, I feel like I want to share these stories with someone other than my husband. But anyway, I'm under contract now, so if it's the best of the last 7 months, I'm hoping I'll get even more when this decade is up. Thanks for listening. I know it's long if you know this, but I had to get some of this stuff off my chest because it was eating at me. I have always been afraid of the dark. Besides, I was always afraid of opening the curtains at night. The big black hole in the yard from the kitchen window isn't scary, so I plan to close the curtains before nightfall. So the first incident happened a week and a half ago. Now, our neighbors down the street have had a lot of company lately, so car doors, people talking, and that sort of thing have been pretty common these past few weeks. They had only lived there for about 2 months, and since they had moved in, many people had come and gone. But it usually stopped when it got dark, at least most nights. So, when I started hearing sounds like doors opening and closing, I got a little worried. I began to wonder if the neighbors had been someone's random overnight guests. Some people do, I guess. I mean, I do sometimes. So I put it out of my mind. I continued watching the video with my husband. After about an hour, she fell asleep and I rested my head on her shoulder, still watching videos, while our dog Penny raised her head and started growing. This dog is a master alarmist. And I mean, when he hears something wrong with the outside, mostly people appearing out of nowhere or people talking outside or something like that, he'll pounce. I'm especially alert when he does. Our other dog, Clementine, is not prone to being aggressive. He is still a puppy, only 7 months old. He had no reaction to this, just sitting and playing with Penny, playing with his ears and tail slipping away, showing his alertness. I immediately lifted myself off my husband's shoulders and got up from the bed. Needless to say, we've been sleeping in our room for the past 2 weeks as our bedroom and bathroom have been renovated. Our mattress is on the floor between the couches. Behind us is a small hall that leads to the laundry room and one of the 2 back doors in the house. This back door has a small window with white curtains. And I hate this door. Her curtain is very visible and I try to avoid it at night. But since it was the lightest window, I went to see what Penny was screaming about. When it was dark, I checked the front windows and saw nothing. After a while, Penny calmed down and stood at the foot of the bed next to the couch. Clementine also sleeps in front of the windows behind the couch across from our bed. I put it out of my mind, thinking it might have been a big moment. He's 12 years old, and he's had moments where he's never screamed before when he hears a commotion outside my back door. Outside, there are lots of tools, a workbench, and a couple of old washers that we recently pulled out of the barn. There are lawn chairs that make a very distinctive sound when pushed into a concrete driveway. That's the sound I heard. I know this sound because when the dogs are outside, Clementine runs to them and even spins them around a lot. So many that I sometimes put them in a shed to prevent this. Penny immediately started growing again and even barked a few times, startling my husband. I froze and didn't want to get up to investigate, so I shook my husband and told him what I had heard. We both got up and looked out the back window, the large picture window in the kitchen, and the window out to the backyard. Finally, he grabbed a crowbar from the tool cabinet and looked out into the kitchen yard. There was nothing there. He sighed and told me the wind had blown these seats. They weren't exactly heavy, the cheap white plastic ones that some people had, and it was windy that night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. Cut after 2 nights. It was a Friday night and my husband went out with a friend from work. I was alone looking at my laptop when suddenly I heard the noise again. Only this time it wasn't just the sound of lawn chairs on the patio. This time it sounded like someone was in the barn. The back laundry room is directly connected to the barn, which is actually a small carport or garage type room where we store all of our stuff. So when there's a sound there, if you're in the room, you can hear it really clearly. This time, only Penny started growing, and even Clementine never started crying. It worried me. I called my husband and told him I heard something in the barn, and he immediately told me to go home and lock the doors. I ran to each door, making sure they were all locked. Passing the kitchen, I glanced at the picture window in the kitchen, forgetting to close the curtains so they were open in the darkness of the yard. Against the bright light in the alley behind the fence, I saw something move. I froze because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how long it would be before my husband came home, and I didn't want to go to the window to close the curtains for fear of who would see me. So I hid behind the corner near the kitchen, Penny and Clementine keeping me on my toes, both still growing. I clutched the phone to my chest, trying to remember if the back kitchen door was locked or not. Finally, I was able to easily walk through the other opening in the kitchen, which was out of the way of the window and led directly to the back door. I got on my hands and knees and slowly made my way to the key. At least I could see the lock clearly from there, and maybe he wouldn't have to go at all. It was either my biggest mistake or my saving grace. The front door window clearly shows where I've been, and it wasn't until I heard the security bell. I froze and turned to the front window, and in the porch light I could clearly see someone staring at me. If he was my husband, he would have gone in immediately. But instead, whoever it was, he was watching. I couldn't make out their faces through the security-type window, but somehow I could tell it wasn't my husband. Without even thinking, I dashed down the hall to our bedroom, a mess of wood, paint cans, and carpet rolled everywhere. At least I knew I could hide in the bathroom and lock the door, while also locking the bedroom door. I immediately called the police, and they made me stay with them while an officer sent me. My husband came home first and was scared to death of me when I knocked on the bedroom door. I walked out of the bedroom and opened the door and threw my arms around him. Not long after, the police arrived, but there was no sign of anyone outside, not even in the alley. I didn't sleep at all that night, and neither did my husband. He lay beside him with a crowbar, and our dogs were also restless, their heads and ears constantly perplexed and looking round. Cut back to 2 nights ago, and after being with the police, I was having a hard time sleeping. So I messed up my sleep schedule quite a bit, staying up until my eyes clearly couldn't function. And that night I watched a movie, trying to focus on fun, happy movies. Without warning, Penny began to cry and scream loudly, clinging to the curtains behind the sofa in front of the bed, and my blood ran cold. I got up to look outside, and the neighbors down the street were all standing in their yard talking very loudly, but something didn't seem right. They all seemed to be looking at me, and Penny wouldn't let them. He screamed so loudly I almost didn't recognize him. I mean, I've never seen it work. I couldn't stop him no matter what I did, so I pulled him out the window. But it wouldn't happen. He jumped into his chair and poked his head between the window blinds at the bottom of the door and continued. My husband woke up and immediately went into home guard mode. He grabbed a crowbar from the floor next to him, went up to the window, and looked out to see what he was yelling at, telling me to stay behind. He was a little annoyed by it when what he saw was a neighbor. He was just as stressed as me since the whole police incident, and finally got some well-deserved rest. But anyway, whatever happened, I told her to maybe call the police again. It made me very uncomfortable to see Penny like this. The whole situation was bad. At first, he didn't want them to do anything if nothing happened, but when he said that, he went to the white paper and his eyes flashed to the picture window in the kitchen behind me. I turned and saw 3 figures climbing over the fence into the alley in the backyard. I immediately called the police again, and my husband opened the back door and I asked him to stay inside. I mean, did these guys have a gun? Or we didn't have one? The police were there within seconds, apparently. They are quick, to be honest. And luckily, they also met the 3 guys who beat up the neighbors on my street. Apparently, according to the officer we spoke to, these people will be arrested for many crimes. One was in possession of drugs with intent to sell. The other 2 guys had outstanding warrants for assault, and the girl they lived with was wanted in the next state over for armed robbery. It really means a den of criminals. They seem to be watching us and our neighbors left and right, figuring out our schedule when things are quiet or busy, trying to find a good time to break in and steal valuables. Yesterday I spoke to the neighbor on the left. She is a very nice lady and has lived next door to my family for the past 14 years. He told me he heard someone break into his house a few weeks ago, and immediately assumed he had installed a security system. I can't help but think that this must have stopped them from doing so they may have moved on to rob and rob us. Our other neighbor, fortunately, didn't have the problem I was concerned about. It was quiet, though, and the house across the street was heavily searched, and the rental company vacated it in the morning. It's just dark in here, and it gives me goosebumps. Although I've always had a strange fear of opening the windows at night, I'm thankful I forgot to close the curtains the first night. If I hadn't seen the first guy in the yard, I probably wouldn't have walked into the kitchen door and noticed someone on my doorstep. If we had closed the curtains the night of the eclipse, my husband might not have seen them all in the yard. Anyway, I'm glad it all worked out and no one got hurt in the end. I feel safer now. Maybe I can finally sleep.